Hi, I'm Helen Taylor, author of Tie-Dye. I will be reading you a chapter today. If you'd like to know more about me and my books, check out the description or my website at helentaylorauthor.co.uk. Let's get started. Chapter 2. Goodwin could feel the adrenaline start to pump around his body as he walked through the sand outside the reception and stepped onto the concrete floor. He took a quick look around, seeing a blond man eating cornflakes to his right. Otherwise, the restaurant was empty of Westerners. To his right were two wooden desks. The taller desk held a fax, telephone, and a large wooden tip box, and stood diagonal to the entrance. The lower desk stood perpendicular to the entrance, jutting up against the other. This one had photos spread on top of it, held in place by a sheet of glass. The desk was strewn with pens, numbered pads, and other desk paraphernalia. Behind the desk was a glass-enclosed room containing 3 computers. The glass walls advertised joint tickets to other areas of Asia, email and fax facilities. A coffee-skinned boy with a ponytail of glossy black hair sat behind the desk. His limbs were long and sprawled over the chair. He looked up as Goodwin entered. "Hello. Welcome," said the boy. "Hi," responded Goodwin. "I would like a room, please." The boy leapt up from his seat so quickly that Goodwin adopted a defensive stance before he became aware that was another place, somewhere else in the world, and a different situation. His odd reaction went unnoticed by the boy. Goodwin watched him dash out from behind the desk, jump down the step into the glass room, grab a handful of plastic rectangles, dwarfing the keys tied to them, and return with lightning speed to Goodwin's side. "I show, please follow," the boy said as he grabbed the handles of the leather hold-all, threw it over his shoulder, and was 20 feet away looking back at him before Goodwin had processed the words. Goodwin pursued him less sure-footed on the deeper sand outside the entrance than the boy had been. Lifting his head from watching his feet, he picked up speed on the firmer grass surface, in time to see the boy walk round the corner of a large wooden bungalow. Goodwin glimpsed his first view of the beach, with a vast sandbank leading out onto the sea. As he rounded the corner, he took no time to admire the view as he searched for the boy who now stood in the open doorway of the second of a row of 3 bungalows facing the beach. He kept to the grass patch as he walked toward the bungalow. The boy had left his shoes on the concrete step at the bottom of the stairs. Goodwin did the same. The boy was now leaning against the door frame as if he had been there for the last hour. He was unworried by Goodwin's inability to keep pace with him. As he reached the balcony, the boy jolted out of his relaxed pose, shot into the room, switching on the light to the bathroom. Goodwin smiled. He realised the boy was in no hurry. He just dashed about when he had to. Otherwise, he hardly moved at all. Goodwin checked his own pace as he followed the boy into the bungalow. He acknowledged a queen-sized bed, dressing table, ceiling fan, and mosquito screens across the windows. He made his way to the bathroom where the boy stood. A sink, shower, toilet, and a large bucket with a bowl for flushing filled the tiled room. He nodded to the boy who, within a blink, was back on the balcony beckoning Goodwin to follow. The boy said, "Bish, see, we always good. Yeah?" Goodwin nodded. Yes, it is lovely. It was. Here was the picture postcard you never believed reflected the reality, always touched up or something. But there it was, blue skies meeting turquoise sea breaking on the powder white sand, all outside his front door. So with this view, what's the charge going to be inflated by? Thought Goodwin. How much? More than last night, he figured, with the view and extra bed instead of a dingy room. Only 400 baht, said the boy, smiling. Goodwin's eyebrows lifted, looking to the boy, waiting for him to laugh. The boy's smile faded. He looked him up and down, scrunching his brow and shaking his head. He said, "Have 200 baht bungalow can show you?" He was serious. It was that cheap. "No, this is great. I'll take it. You couldn't fault £6 a night for this view." Last night had been when he'd been taken for a tourist. He pulled out his wallet. The boy shook his head. "You pay every Friday, or when you leave before." He handed Goodwin the key. "How long you stay?" 2 weeks, I think. "Ah, good. You happy here?" The boy nodded and walked down the steps, slipping into his flip-flops as if they weren't there. Goodwin had a thought. "Excuse me," he said before the boy had disappeared as quickly as he'd come. "Are Alison and Dave staying here?" The boy thought for a second and nodded his head. Smiling, he said, "Alison and Dave. Yes, you know." "Yes, I do," he added no more. He'd keep who he was to himself for now. "Day sleep now in hammock," said the boy, putting the palms of his hands together against his tilted cheek. "Alison, I don't know. Maybe in Tongsala with Hazel. Do email." The boy nodded, as if agreeing with himself. Goodwin found himself mimicking the nodding. He stopped. "Thank you." The boy nodded. "Kop kun kwap." He turned away, walking off at the same high speed back towards the restaurant. Goodwin walked back into his new home for the next 2 weeks. This time he took in more detail of the room. The large, comfortable queen-size mattress atop a solid mahogany-coloured wood frame, noticing this time the detail of a small shelf along the headboard, the darker wooden floorboards and the wood-panelled walls. In front of the door was the dressing table, with a small drawer at the front, above it a mirror. A square stool sat beneath the dressing table, coordinating with the curtains, both made from a shiny pink material. The 6 arched windows were made up of 3 layers. The outer layer, the wood frame, housing 6 smaller frames with glass. The middle layer, made of iron bars, giving security disguised by ornate design. And the inner layer, mosquito screens. Goodwin sat on the bed, the one he would spend the next 2 weeks alone in. It felt strange to sleep in a double bed alone. For the past year, his sofa had been where he'd laid his head at night. Only in the morning after the row with Bowman had he woken up in his own bed. He wondered how Bowman was doing. Before their disagreement, Bowman had confided in him that he was having problems with Greg, his son. The pub had been warm and cosy, thanks to the open fire at one end of the room. It had been early. The regulars hadn't ventured out by then. That was, if they would have on a night like that. Goodwin had stood by the fire warming himself, as Bowman had struggled his expanse out of his coat at the bar, while the barman had poured their drinks. Neither of them had wanted to have the conversation they knew was coming, so when Bowman had asked Matt for some advice, Goodwin had grabbed at it. He'd taken a mouthful of lager from his glass and set it back on the beer mat. "Sure you can, Phil. What's the problem?" "It's Greg." Phil had been running his finger around the top of his glass. He didn't look up. Greg was Bowman's oldest son, born within days of Alison. In the same way Phil was like a second father to Alison, Goodwin felt the same for Greg. He'd waited for Bowman to continue. "This might be difficult," Bowman had said, raising his eyebrows to Goodwin. "Go on." "Well, with the Rice case..." Straight away, Goodwin hadn't liked the direction the conversation was taking. Keeping Phil off the subject he hadn't wanted to discuss was one thing, but Rice, with the problems and associations with his own family, was another subject he would rather have avoided. "I think you can assume I do, Phil. Being as he was convicted today..." "Yeah, with that case... and Alison..." "Alison? With Hewitt, you mean?" Goodwin had asked, shifting in his seat. Bowman nodded. "Greg isn't having a relationship with a woman suspect, is he?" Goodwin had been surprised. Women criminals, those that would worry Bowman to this extent, tended to be sophisticated. For all the positive traits Greg had, being his father's son meant sophistication wasn't one of them. "Not exactly," was Bowman's cryptic response. "Well, I can't read your mind, Phil. Lay it out for me." "It's more that he might be involved, not so much with a woman..." "Well, with what then? A man?" Goodwin had shrugged it off. Greg wasn't gay. An attractive young man with a string of women after him, according to Alison. His Fred hadn't so easily. Bowman had stared straight through Goodwin, not listening. This had got to his friend. But why? Greg wasn't gay. He was sure of it. Goodwin had leant forward again, taking another sip of beer as he'd prepared to say what to say next. "It wouldn't matter if it was, would it?" Goodwin watched as Bowman shook his head, free of thoughts. His face had processed Goodwin's last words. His eyes had widened. "Of course it matters if Greg is involved with... how do I get past that one with the team, eh? It's not as if I shouldn't recognise the signs, is it? Christ, we see 'em every day. At least with Alison... Well, Hewitt was innocent, wasn't he? With this, rarely anyone involved is innocent." Why was Phil talking this way? A relationship wasn't a crime. Well, not since he'd last looked. Phil thought Greg was involved in criminal activity. Maybe his reaction was to be expected. But being gay wasn't a crime. Goodwin had still had the difficulty believing Greg was gay. So did all this relate to Alison and Hewitt, to Greg and being gay, or to a crime? "It doesn't matter in the end that Hewitt was innocent. I still didn't know about it, Phil. How do you think I felt when we turned up to arrest Hewitt and found him with my daughter? How do you think I felt when I had to leave that interview, let someone else continue? If I had stayed, I would have been the one up for murder, no doubt about it. Listening to him inform us of all the women he'd slept with, had on the go, one of whom was my daughter. And let's not forget 2 of them are dead. Well, I couldn't bear that, not then, at that time. 1 month after, it still twists my gut when I think about it now." Bowman looked up at him. "It's different, Matt. You didn't know, and Alison wasn't breaking the law." He dropped his head again. "You're going to have to spell this out to me, Phil. What or who is Greg involved with?" "Drugs. I'm almost sure of it." Goodwin had known Greg wasn't gay, but he could have believed that more than drugs. Drugs? Not Greg. He'd always been a good kid. Like Alison. He was nothing like Dave. So, had he missed something with Alison? No, he was sure Alison didn't do drugs. Greg? No. Alison and Greg were close, or had been. Greg wouldn't give up university and his potential for a quick high. Or would he? No wonder Phil was worried about like this. At least you know. Now you can do something, can't you? God, I wish I didn't. What do you do? That is better than having it come as a shock. Don't you think it's worse that I know? That makes me an accessory, Matt. To a crime. And I'm a copper, for Christ's sake. Phil, forget it, Matt. I'll handle it. But Phil, I don't understand why... I said forget it. Let's talk about something else. And they had. Bowman had talked about Jenny, his other kids, neglecting further mention of Greg, and the dogs. The stupid things they had done or said, arguments over the design of the extension Bowman's brother was building for them. But Bowman had brought the conversation back round to the reason they had been sharing the pint in the Queen's Head. So, Matt, take some time, will you? Goodwin had snapped back to his chair and folded his arms. We already discussed that back in the office. I'm not taking holiday. End of story. Why don't you visit that daughter of yours? Have some quality time. Like Alison would want me around. That long-haired boyfriend of hers sure as hell wouldn't. Well, go to Italy. You know how much you love Italy, Bowman had encouraged. Go screw yourself, Phil. Goodwin had shot up from his chair, pulling his coat from the back of it. Bowman had risen too, dwarfing Goodwin. He'd placed his massive hand on Goodwin's arm. Sit down, Matt. Let's talk about this. Bowman had known he'd touched a nerve with the mention of Italy and its memories for Goodwin. Goodwin had tried to shrug him off. I think we've done enough talking. Just accept I don't want time off. He downed his beer. I've had enough. I'm off, he said between gulps. Bowman had remained standing, still blocking Goodwin's escape route. Phil wasn't going to let Goodwin walk away. Matt, you haven't had a day off since the funeral. Goodwin had stopped drinking. He'd pleaded with his eyes, begged even. More than anything, at that moment, Goodwin had wanted, even needed, Bowman to drop it. He'd thought he couldn't go where this was leading. Bowman had pushed on Goodwin's arm until he'd given in and slumped back in his chair. He'd been exhausted, a broken man. You need a break, Matt. Even when you aren't working, you take it home. Take a look at the mess you're in. I've let this ride for a year, but now you have to face it. Goodwin had looked up at Phil. He'd buried the pain he couldn't afford to let surface. If Phil cared about him, he wouldn't be doing this. He wouldn't be dragging this up. How could he want me to feel pain? How can he expect me to talk about something that would be unbearable? Would break him in half, if he faced it at all. So he couldn't and wouldn't, and Phil was not going to make him. Face what, Phil? You have no idea what it feels like to go home to an empty flat, to sleep in an empty bed. I face it every day, every bloody day. No, you don't. You ignore it every day. You chase murderers so you don't go home. You don't even sleep in that empty bed. Phil's voice rose. Goodwin had stared straight at him. He couldn't know Goodwin didn't sleep in the bed, could he? No. He was making a guess. Had to be. It hadn't mattered that he got it right. Who could have told him? Alison was the only one who knew, and he'd managed to fob her off with saying he'd fallen asleep on the sofa or emerging from the bedroom as she got up. Besides, Alison had been away for 3 months. No, Bowman was guessing, wasn't he? Bowman had explained without prompting from Goodwin. Alison told me, Matt. She was worried about you. She needed someone to talk to. You didn't think to tell my daughter to talk to her own father instead of someone else's? Goodwin had said spitefully. Why had she gone to Phil? Couldn't she have talked to him? She couldn't talk to you, Matt. You were never there. When you were, she said you avoided any mention of Susan. She felt you didn't want her around. She wasn't important to you. Your murderers warranted more of your time than your own daughter did. You're a fine one to talk about putting your kids first when you're more worried about what the team will think than about Greg or what he's been going through. It struck a defensive blow, and Bowman had acknowledged the rebuke with a nod. They sat in silence for a moment before Bowman had broken it. Susan is dead, Matt. You have to let her go. Goodwin had shaken his head. If he shook it hard enough, the pub would disappear. Phil would, and the words his friend had just spoken would. It would be like they were never spoken. There'd be no truth in them. He just had to keep shaking until Phil stopped talking. Rice didn't kill your wife. If you hadn't been at one of his crime scenes, you would have been somewhere else. It was an accident, Matt. Putting him away has not changed that fact. There was nothing you could have done. Take some time, give yourself a chance to get your head round it. The atmosphere around their table had become quiet and still, broken only by a crackle from the fire or a whistle of wind down the chimney. Goodwin had risen again from his chair. He'd leant over the table, hands supporting him as he leant towards Phil, fists clenched. Goodwin had seen the spray from his mouth as it had appeared on Bowman's face. He'd heard the agony in his own voice, felt the burn in his heart. Don't you dare ever talk about my wife or my child again. I'll take a day. One fucking day. Then, he moved closer still to Phil, then I want a new case. Bowman had stayed watching the fire as Goodwin had strayed out of the pub, slamming the door open, letting in a biting wind. The mattress was good and firm. Knowing he might see Alison soon, he didn't want to continue his thoughts on from that night in the pub and where they would lead. Satisfied with the room, he decided to unpack. With everything tidy, logical, and in its place, he closed the door, locking it with one of the 3 bolts on the inside, stripped off his clothes, took the towel from the bed, and took a shower. The cool water refreshed him, cleaning off the road dust from his body and the sea salt from his close-cropped hair. Replacing his clothes, he opened the door to walk out onto the balcony. He inhaled the warm air as he looked out over the sea to Koh Pha Ngan, the island he'd left not 3 hours ago. A volleyball net stood to his right on the beach in front of him. Behind that, a children's play area. Maybe he wouldn't be the only person over 20. Maybe anyone who stayed with children would be closer to his age. All the staff had been matched the age group of the others had arrived on the island with. Stone and wicker chairs and tables dotted the beach, as well as hammocks strung between the shade-giving trees. He could see the high tide mark on the shore, but the tide was out so far a football pitch area of sand reached out to the sea, separated by an ankle-deep stream from the main beach. He decided on a walk to stretch his legs from travelling for so long. Goodwin wandered out to the sandbank, following the waterline, and paddled out on the far side towards Samui. On the sand he saw translucent crabs no bigger than his little fingernail, scuttling along the surface, disappearing into tiny holes. Schools of tiny fish darted around in the stream between the island and the shore. Rocks of various sizes rose out of the stream and lay dotted on the sandbank. Women with large brimmed hats chipped away at the rocks, collecting shell creatures, like clams, in baskets. Walking out further, the water still less than knee height, Goodwin searched the sea for other life. He was amazed at the temperature of the water, almost like a bath. He could see the seabed with its layer of broken coral. He watched the sand swirl around his sandals as he took each step. He started to feel a tightening across his chest, shoulders and back. Sunburn already? He touched his chest, burning hot. It was time to get into the shade. He should have put on protection. Looking at his watch, he was amazed only 20 minutes had passed. This sun was hot. A swing in the colourful cotton hammock in the shade of his balcony tempted him back. As he passed along the section of beach nearest the restaurant, he searched for Alison at the tables, but she wasn't there. Back on his balcony, lying in the hammock, he found a reference to Chok D in his guidebook. Establishing his bearings on the map, he saw Tongsalar town looked the closest to his resort, with plenty of facilities. He might take a trip there later. Exchanging the guidebook for his novel, he buried himself in the characters and plot within its pages. A movement to the right of Goodwin's eyeline made him glance up from his book. The man looked at Goodwin and his smile faded. His head sunk as his shoulders rounded forward when he recognised Goodwin in his hammock. Goodwin said nothing, enjoying the man's expression. Then, tinged with disgust, his humorous smile faded. He stared at the dishevelled, hungover figure. His hair, looking like it had not been washed in a long time, was tied back and matted. He wore no top, his skinny chest showing the lines of his ribs in enough detail you could have counted them. The young man's lanky height meant the orange trousers, tied around his waist, with the crutch halfway between his real crutch and his knees, were about a foot too short, his bony shins emerging from the wide legs of the material. They told me someone had arrived who knew me, but... He paused, smile gone, a flash of annoyance shrouding his face. But you're the last person I would have expected it to be. Hello, Dave, said Goodwin. What are you doing here? Goodwin couldn't help but push Dave's dislike of him. Aren't you pleased to see me, Dave? He said. Dave's cool grey eyes narrowed at the question. Nothing came from his mouth, so Goodwin cut the formality and continued. I finished up a case, had some holiday due, and thought I would spend some time with my daughter. You don't have a problem with that, do you? Shouldn't this boy be showing him some more respect? After all, he was a policeman, and the father of this boy's girlfriend. Dave dropped his gaze to the sand, mumbling his response. I suppose not. How do you know where we were? Alison is my daughter. She emailed me telling me where she was. Goodwin was aware the conversation was deteriorating into a possession question between the two men in Alison's life, but he couldn't help getting riled up by Dave. Alison invited you to visit? She didn't tell me. Dave shook his head. She would never have invited you. Why not? I am her father. I'm sure she doesn't tell you everything. Goodwin smiled. Score one for him. She would have told me something like that, and you know it. Score one for the opposition. Goodwin knew he was right. She would tell him everything. She would have at least told him if she'd invited Goodwin out. He caught himself before he made another smart remark. He knew being at odds with Dave would not endear either of them to Alison. He also had to spend 2 weeks with Dave, share Alison with him. He didn't like it, but for her sake, he had to behave like the adult he was supposed to be, not the child he'd just imitated. "You're right, Dave. I'm sorry. Anyway, where is she?" He sat up in the hammock. Dave made circles in the sand with his dirty bare feet. He looked up at Goodwin like a child who knows they have done something wrong. "I don't know." That's it for today, the end of the chapter. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you again next time for the next chapter. Don't forget to visit www.helentaylorauthor.co.uk to ensure you don't miss the next episode.